born and raised in Los Angeles. My father's Cuban, my mother's Mexican. So I'm first generation. They're both immigrants. My mother, she came from Mexico when she was 18. She wanted to be a movie star, and she came to Los Angeles. My dad kind of grew up with a silver spoon. His father was a general consulate of Cuba, and he was traveling quite a bit in the United States. This was under Bautista before Castro. And so, they had all the amenities of a consulate, general consulate. And, they had homes in Mexico and in Cuba. Every summer they go back to Cuba. They had drivers. Each child had its own nanny. Everything was paid for. And then when Castro took over, they kind of lost everything. And they were here, so they just had to kind of make do with what they had. Castro offered my grandmother, if they went back to Cuba, she could get the pension that my grandfather had. But she's like, you can have the pension. I can see where this is going. I'm going to stay here and try my luck here in this capitalist society. And they ended up doing really well. But that, really shifted the course for them when my father was about 19 or 20 years old. So, they met in Los Angeles. They're on the freeway driving. My dad was a bit of a rascal with his buddy, and he saw two hot blondes in a car, and he's like, he's telling them, hey, your tire is like, there's something wrong with the tire. And the girls got freaked out, and they pulled over, and they're like, what's wrong with the tire? He's like, nothing. I was just indicating that it's rolling forward. It was doing what it's supposed to do. What's your name? My name is Peter. And then, so they had a party that night, invited the girls, and the rest is history. They fell in love. And
those are rare skills. We have to teach our kids those skills. They don't have those skills anymore.
Those skills, they're flirting on DM messages, and it's a very safe and kind of on-demand type of thing. You got to be quick with these face-to-face interactions. So my father was married once before, had a son, so I had a half brother, Peter. And then under this marriage, they had my sister, and then I was born 3 years later, and that's all my siblings. So I grew up in Los Angeles. We lived in Hollywood. When I was about 3 years old, moved out to San Fernando Valley in Northridge, and really great upbringing. My mother was very Catholic. I was, raised in a Catholic home. We spoke Spanish at home, and then English anywhere outside the house, and went to private school. My dad, very hardworking. He owned his own business. He did drapes, carpeting. He'd go out and do the estimates, and he'd hire his guys to kind of install it and organize the transaction. My mother was a stay-at-home mother, and she would go and help my dad with taking appointments and things like that from time to time. But I spent most of my life with my sister and my mother, and my dad spent most of his life at work because he was doing 12, 15-hour days. He would leave before I woke up in the morning, and he'd be home well after I went to bed. Saturdays, every Saturday he would work, sometimes Sundays as well. And but Sundays we'd go to church together, and we'd spend time as a family. And so it was a very good upbringing. We had a lot of love in our home, but also a lot of discipline, because very passionate Latin household. So as long as we were in line, man, the love was unconditional. But if you just stepped outside of the rules a little bit, the hellfire would rain down. So we were never like our discipline wasn't physical. It was always verbal.
Yeah.
So, but my mother was very intense, and she would really express her emotions. And we grew up middle class, but my dad, because of the fluctuation in income, sometimes would fall behind. So there were times where we would, they'd shut off the water. Like, he couldn't keep up with payments on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
But he'd get this huge influx of cash, get everything paid up to date, and then move forward, right? And so we would have months where we didn't have any money, and then we would have months where we just had so much surplus, right?
Yeah.
So with that, in high school, my parents bought me my first car. They paid for college, but we also had a chain on the gate, because the repo man would come, and every 3 or 4 months they'd be looking for the car, and I'd have to hide at my friend's house or whatever. So it was, I wouldn't say it was rough, but there were a couple things there that we had to kind of navigate around that most of my friends weren't dealing with. Cold showers when they shut off the gas, and you have to go to school in the morning, and you take a freezing cold shower at 5 a.m. It's tough, but it gives you a little bit of grit. And my dad was good at teaching me grit, and my mom was very good at kind of teaching me these values of family and
how did they explain those periods? How did they kind of articulated those periods to you guys as kids?
I mean, they wouldn't say anything. My dad taught me how to go outside and turn on the water again until they put a padlock on it, because the water company would come and they'd realize that we just opened it again, so they'd put a padlock on it, and then he would pay the bill. But we just learned.
There's no let me make you feel a sense of certainty. There's just like, okay, we're just gonna deal with it. We're just gonna solve the problem.
Yeah, it was. I mean, my dad was he didn't plan ahead. He was day by day, cash, and we didn't do organized sports. All my friends did. And I asked my dad, I wanted to go play baseball with my friends in Little League because they were all in organized sports. My dad's like, what are you talking about? There's a ball and a bat in the garage and you got friends. Just go get organized and play outside. I'm like, they have a whole schedule. They've got a whole, league and uniforms and all that. And he's like, yeah, you don't need all that. You got a ball. You're fine, So kind of had to deal with that. But my parents were very social. We had a lot of parties at home. They were very close with well-known people in the Latin community. Fernando Valenzuela, well-known Dodger pitcher. He was my godfather for my first communion. We were very close with their family. And that's just because my dad knew his manager through, being out at nightclubs with my mom or going out to different parties. And we'd have a lot of parties at home, and I would have to kind of host the children in my room and all that. And so it was great. We had a lot of community and a lot of love in our home. So
that's awesome. Yeah. So what are some of the things that, you think your parents did really well? And then obviously the other question is going to be, what is the part that they could have done better?
I think what they did right was, my dad was a hard worker. I always saw him getting up early and going to work, and I saw him coming home late and he was tired. And I knew that was for us. So he was really good at teaching me grit, even though he wasn't there to kind of give me the words.
Yeah.
As often when he was around, he would give me that guidance, and I saw it, right? He would lead by example. So, if we had to change something around the house or fix a faucet, like he'd make me do it. If the screw was stripped and there was no way to do it, I'd want to give up. And he would just force me to continue. And I have blisters on my hands. He's like, keep going until you get it.
Yeah.
If at first you don't succeed, try again. And we'd be fighting, and he would just be patient. And eventually we would get it off and we would fix it. Yeah. And he'd be very proud of me because I didn't give up,
Yeah.
I remember once we were driving to a wedding or something. We were dressed real nice, and my mom and my sister were in another car, and they went up ahead. And my dad and I, for some reason, went in a different car, but we got a flat tire. I was about 10 years old. We pull over. My dad's dressed real nice. I'm dressed real nice. And he starts waving his finger around, telling me, hey, you got to take this out of the car. You got to undo this. I'm like, I'm a 10-year-old kid. I'm on the side of the freeway. Cars are going 85 miles an hour.
Yeah.
He's got me changing the tire. The bolts don't go easily. So he's telling me to step on it and to leverage. And he's just telling me what to do. And I'm so angry. I'm taking the tire. My suit gets all dirty. I take out the old tire. I put everything on. I'm just covered in muck, but we have the tire on. It took about 30 minutes. We drive to the closest gas station. I wash up, and then we go. And I was so upset because I was like, he didn't want to get dirty.
Yeah.
And so he made me do the dirty work. And what kind of a person would do that to a 10-year-old kid? I tell my mom was livid. She came and consoled me and everything. And I was like, little baby boy, feeling consoled and all that. Flash forward to 16, 17 years old. I'm in my first car with my high school friends. We're driving and heading to a party, and everybody's in the car. I got 5 guys in the car. We get a flat tire, and nobody knew what to do. They're standing around, all these young guys that think they have the world figured out, and everybody's looking at each other. What do we do? In 10 minutes, I had the tire fixed. We're back on the road. I didn't even get dirty, right? Because I knew what to avoid. And at that moment, I realized what my dad was doing. And he didn't, he was calm. He was quiet. He never fought back with my mom. He didn't tell me anything, but it stuck, right? And at that moment, when there were 5 young men that had to step in to fix a situation, we didn't have to call for help because I
Yeah.
was able to do it myself. And that's really what my dad was teaching me. So that grit, those kind of examples of like, do it while I guide you, as opposed to watch me do it and learn.
Yeah.
And just being patient with my pushback, you know, because if he would have let me win, I would have never changed the tire. I would have never, you know, gotten those things done. So I think grit was good. Hard work ethic was what my dad did really well.
And that patient piece is huge, because
Yeah.
most people like go for the convenient thing. People go like, okay, let me just solve this and then move on and go to the party. That,
Yeah.
you know, willingness to stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, he could have changed the tire in 10 minutes, and we could have been, if the priority was the party, we would have been on the road in no time. But he waited the 20, 30, 40 minutes for a 10-year-old to do it.
Yeah. And nothing like the real experience, like you said, like you feel in the cars behind you, and you feel you're in the freeway, and you got urgency to go somewhere, and then there's that whole emotion, everything that's going on in your head. It's not just doing the tire in front of your house in the garage. It's like being in that, you know, in that situation with the pressure of the party, the pressure of the clothes, the cars, you know, you don't know what's going to happen. So for a 10-year-old, that's a lot of emotion, and it's a lot of experience.
Yeah, and it pushes you, right? But when you get through it, there is a sense of pride at the end. And even though you don't want to admit it, I didn't want to admit it because I was fighting with him. I was against him. But deep down inside, I was like, I can't believe I just did that. That's awesome. And then another thing that they were good at was social skills. When I came into the house and there were people at home and they were having a little party or a gathering, and I'm getting home from football practice, like I coming into a room had to go in and say hi to each person, and then I could go up to my room and go do what I wanted to do. But I had to be polite and introduce myself. It was my duty as the person coming into the social situation to introduce myself. And so I remember getting, you know, learning that. And then my mom, you know, obviously family, taking care of each other, strong bond with my sister. These are a lot of things that they did really well, and they taught us, and it stuck. I wish they would have been better with money, or at least taught us some things about money, because I really struggled to kind of undo some of those habits. I still struggle with them today. Thank God for Robert Kiyosaki, my rich dad. He actually taught me about money and how to look at things. But you know, they weren't perfect. But you know, in hindsight, man, there were a lot of great things about my upbringing that made me who I am today.
So let's double click on that one. Like, that's the part that they didn't do so well. That's the part that you wish they did well, is the money part.
Yeah.
Did that affect you the same way as your siblings?
A little differently.
Okay.
I think
how each person kind of like.
I think, you know, I think there's a lot to be said for the order of which people are born. Like a firstborn and a secondborn, they have a different life, right?
Yeah.
My sister was always tasked with taking care of the administrative things at school and all this other stuff. And me being the second, I kind of had everything taken care of for me, but I also got to watch. So any mistakes that they might have made, or any conflict that occurred between my sister and my parents, I got to observe and take a mental note and say, when I do that, I'm going to do it differently. Or observe and say, hey, this isn't working. There's no reason to fight back for a small battle when there's a larger war to be won, right? So little things like that I picked up on, that I think, you know, my sister had a very different experience because she had all those responsibilities. When she got her first car, she had to drive me everywhere, right? When I got my first car, she was already in college. I got to live free and do what I wanted, right? So very different upbringing. So I think I tended to be, also maybe because I was the man of the house and the male, and kind of watching my father and emulating him, you know, I felt more sympathy for like the financial aspect of things. So I was always a little bit more conservative with the way I did things. Whereas my sister was probably a little bit more like my mother, that had this idea of like, you know, being taken care of, and you know, not necessarily having to navigate that as carefully around those things. But my sister's very successful. She's a producer at Amazon Prime. She was at Netflix for years. She had her own business in Europe, a production company. And so she's doing really well, and she's a great mother. And really good with her kids. But her as well as we struggle financially with, they say it's not how much you make, it's how much you spend, right?
Yeah.
So you can make $1 million a year, but if you're spending 1.2, it doesn't matter. You're going into debt every year, and you're just one step behind, right? So
you found yourself repeating the same pattern as your parents?
I think instinctively, I really enjoy spending money.
Yeah.
I enjoy spending it on experiences. I enjoy going out to eat for dinner, and all these things that I look at money as a tool for enjoying myself, as opposed to a tool for generating, a fraction of what, if I have $1 million, I can look at that as like, hey, I have $1 million, let's enjoy it. Or I can look at that as I have $100,000 every year for the rest of my life. Sure. Right. So that's a shift that nobody ever taught me, that I had to learn along the way. Right. So, it's very easy to burn through the money you make. And those are the challenges that I have. Even today, I have to be careful, and it hurts. It sucks to make the conservative decisions. When you want to do it big and enjoy yourself, but you gotta think about the future, right?
And sometimes I almost feel like it's a DNA thing too. It's like, you're born with a certain programming, and then you're just gonna have certain tendencies, that hey, you're gonna love to eat sweets, and then that's just your thing, and your parents were the same, or you're gonna love to spend a little bit more money, or party a little bit harder, or drink a little bit more, or whatever. There's certain code and programming that just come through from the parents and their parents. So, you just got to know what that code is and figure out how to, work around it. Be resourceful, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, well, I mean, I studied economics in college, but I took these electives, and one of them was psychology, when I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I learned about Freud, and Freud's whole idea was, we fall into these patterns. And when you're raised, like the whole Oedipus complex, right? So in your home, as a male, you look at your father as an example of who you need to be in society when it's your turn.
Yeah.
And in your home, as a male, you look at your mother as an example of your wife and your, the mother of your children, and who she needs to be. So what ends up happening if your mother is an alcoholic, you're going to end up being attracted to women that have those tendencies, because that is home. Even though it was chaotic or whatever the issues were, it feels comfortable to you because that's all you know, right? So that was Freud's idea. If your father was a hard worker, you're going to feel like you need to be a hard worker. You're going to emulate him. And so the idea that you want to marry your mother and replace your father was Freud's idea, right? And so the whole concept behind that, when he identified that, was that cycle will always continue in the subconscious until the moment you realize that it exists and it's true. At that moment, you now have the choice, because now you can break those habits and those tendencies, and you can see your dating pattern. Who are the women that you're attracted to? Are they really good for you, or is it just comfortable because that's all you know? And can you break that going forward, right? So, DNA, programming, or whatever it is, there's a lot to be said for that. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and I actually know a lot of people, and myself the same way. I did the opposite of my parents. I married the opposite of my mother. Like I went the opposite, like literally, intentionally, as early as I could. I'm gonna do the opposite. So it's not necessarily a good or bad. It's just, I'm assuming it all depends on your connection to your parents and how you perceive them. And that's how if you perceive them at this higher regards, then you want to be like them. If you don't, then you want to switch the opposite. And Adrian and I were talking about this just last time. We're kind of the same way, but it's fascinating. So, and it's also interesting to see how different siblings behave in the same environment differently, and how they take it differently. And then we're all born with certain tendencies. So our goal is to leverage the good ones, and then kind of build against the not the great ones, not the ones that are helpful to us. So how do you
the patterns you want to break, right? And knowing that you have the power to break them, right?
Yes, exactly. So how are you using that knowledge with your kids now? How many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids. So I have a 6-year-old daughter. Her name's Yara. She's amazing. And I have a 4-year-old son. His name is Kai, and he is a fireball, but he's awesome. Yara is the Brazilian river goddess. It comes from Native American folklore in the Amazon. And my wife and I met in Brazil, so we gave her kind of a Brazilian theme, but also water theme. And my son, Kai, is the Japanese word for ocean.
Yeah.
My wife grew up in Japan, so we wanted to kind of put a touch on her upbringing a little bit there in our family. She's full Peruvian, but she grew up in Japan. And he's Kai Luca. And so Kai means ocean. Luca in Italian is shimmering light. And growing up out here in LA, one of my favorite moments of the day is when you're out on PCH or on the pier and the sun is setting. Certain times of the year when it sets right on the ocean, other times kind of behind the hills. But when it's right on the ocean, man, the ocean looks silver. You got these little rivets of gold that are popping off. You've got bright blue sky with orange clouds. You got purple mountains. It's just a moment where since I was a kid, I just pause and I say, this isn't going to last for more than a few minutes because the sun's about to go away. It just overwhelms me with emotion. And so my son is named after that moment, Kai Luca. Cool. He represents that of what I feel is one of the best moments of the day.
That's awesome.
And the perks of life. The problem is I should have probably named him El Nino because he is the ocean, but more during a torrential downpour and like some chaotic hurricane as opposed to like this peaceful, calm, Zen-like moment. But he's got his moments, but he's awesome. He's a lot of fun. We just started jiu-jitsu with him last week. He had his 4th class yesterday and he's loving it.
That's
he sees dad come home in the gi and he gets all excited. So now he's got his own little gi and he's great.
That's cool. So what are some of the learnings that you brought with you from your parents to your kids?
I think family values. That's a big one. My parents were very religious. We were religious growing up, Catholic home. For some reason, I'm not very religious. I kind of look at things differently. And so we don't have that. I wish we kind of did a little bit because there were a lot of values that were just automatic at school.
Yeah.
Private school. I grew up in private Catholic school. My kids are public school, even though we're in Los Angeles. We're in a part of Los Angeles where it's a separate school district and the public schools are really good out here. So we don't send them to private school, but they're missing a little bit of that. I wish we had that. But my parents, they had a lot of discipline. I believe in discipline. I think kids they should have their own choices and they should have their own autonomy. But I think you need to really tell them where the rules are and give them those guidelines. And establishing those rules is a little bit, there are some fireworks there. But once they're established, I think it gives them peace and calm because they know where they need to be. Now, I believe when they get older, I don't know yet, but when they get to those teenage years, they're by nature meant to go out and kind of forge their own path. And at that point, they're going to start testing those rules and testing those guidelines and realizing that, I can't go too far past that because mom was right. I'm going to get burned. I'm going to get hurt but I think that's a lot of, what we're doing. So a lot of love, sacrifice, I think is important to teach them that, I was always taught that you have to look out for others or, when you're at the table, you serve others before you serve yourself. And so that's something that I want my kids to understand. Work ethic. I explained to them that, in discipline, really, they have to do these things that have to be done before they can do what they want to do. Right. Yeah. So that's kind of the mantra I tell my kids. I say, first, we do what we have to do first, and then we do what we want. Right. Yeah. So that kind of teaches them to take care of what they have to do, feed the dog, or put the shoes in order at the front of the front door, or whatever their tasks are around the house to help out. they have to do that or do their homework before they can go outside and play and do anything else, right? So so that's another one. And then sibling love. I mean, my mom was really good at telling my sister and I that, one day my parents won't be around. She would tell us, one day your father and I won't be here anymore, and you'll only have each other. You have to look out for each other. You have to take care of each other. This was usually in a moment that we were fighting, right? And my sister really took that to heart, and she kind of took that ownership, and she's really good at keeping us bonded and united. But even today, like I reach out to her, we have, once a month we get our families together, and so we're very close. We talk all the time. And I think that's huge. I see a lot of my cousins or other people that, are estranged from their siblings. They don't talk, or they fight or whatever. But my sister and I know that if we don't agree on something, or if we're fighting over something, even if it gets ugly, there's a bigger thing here, and that we got to stay united no matter what. So we're very quick to reconcile and very quick to look out for each other, right? So
that's
awesome. I want my kids to have that too. And
that's awesome. I think that's huge. A lot of people don't teach that. And I mean, a lot of people don't go as, explicit as your parents did, and, literally say it. It's like, hey, we're not going to be here. And I tell my kids, like, listen, you need to be prepared to take a bullet for your sibling. Like, you'll die for your sister, or you'll die for your brother, or whatever. That's how far we go. You know what I mean? And we talk about, if you're in the situation where, one of you gets, harassed or whatever, the other person just gets involved. If you see a fight, you just punch the other way. You don't ask questions later. You know what I mean? We talk about, the whole, if one of them comes in and says, hey, I need you to come with me, in the middle of the night, and don't ask any questions, you go and you don't ask any questions.
Right.
That's like literally every versions of these sentences over and over and over, because just programming is just, it has to be like embedded.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing I learned from you in our group chat is, I don't do enough of that. And I know that they get to a certain age and they're going to stop listening.
Yeah.
So I'm doing like, I read the Stoics a lot. So I read, like, I don't know if you've read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So they're great because they're just little notes that he made for himself to remind himself. He didn't think the whole world was going to read this, right? So very personal notes. So what I'm doing now is, and I'm happy to share it with the group once it's finished, but I've got a handful of topics, right? And for each topic, essentially what I'm saying, these are like my meditations. These are my learnings that I want my kids to learn from me. These are things that I've learned over time. So we talk about legacy and transferring wealth to your kids. You give them the money that you've accumulated to help them get a head start or whatever it is. But also, what about the knowledge you've accumulated, the mistakes that you've made, and what you've learned from that? We teach them that by like giving them guidance, but I don't know that we have these mantras that we constantly, repeat or kind of program, right? So that's one thing that we're doing now is I've got this list of things that I really want them to take away before I die, so that, my goal is when I die that they really pick this stuff up from me, right? So
they got the download.
I've got like maybe 6 or 7 categories, and each one has like maybe 10 or 12 things that they're just little sayings, little mantras. Like one of them is we do what we have to before we do what we want to, or so things around grit, things around love, how to take care of your partner, and things like that, right? So
that's awesome. So going back to, I want to double click on the religion part, because you said you grew up Catholic, and then you feel now that there's value in those values, in having essentially a mechanism of how to teach, or how to an environment or a system that communicates those values in an almost like an automated way, where you don't have to do it yourself. Someone else is doing it, and he's doing it consistently. So, my wife and I, I'm not really, my wife and I are not religious. I grew up in one religion. My wife grew up in a different religion, but we didn't really, teach our kids any religion. So, we were talking about this actually last time. It's like religion is essentially a package of values. And then when you study all the religions, they're pretty much all kind of coming from the same place. And we always laugh about this, but it's just coming from the fuck around and find out. Historically, they're coming from nature, like, if you tell you, okay, don't steal, because someone else stole and got beaten up, don't kill someone, you're going to get killed. If you try to, pursue someone else's wife, you're going to get, your ass kicked. So they're like, all these values are just natural values. They're just from nature. You're going to do some things and some things are going to happen to you. So we came together and we said, as a community, we're not going to do those things. And we're going to do these things are no-go. These things are good. And so for me, like, all values come from nature. And so if we can teach our kids how to, we can teach our kids those set of values within our home. And we have these mantras, like you said, and maybe have them written out and then repeat them over time. Our kids are going to pick up the reasoning, the logic of it, without the nonsense of the singing and the procedural stuff and giving the money. I mean, yes, go donate. Yes, go give to the poor. Yes, go help. Those who don't have. And that's part of our values as well, the contribution value. But giving back to society, being a good person. But you don't necessarily need like a branded product. Software from some other religion, as long as you're intentional. And I believe it's more valuable that way, because I think when you outsource morality to some other, franchise, you never know. The kid might stick, it might click with the kids, or it may not. It may reject it. But if it's coming from you and you're embedding these values and you're essentially teaching them, and you're actually acting them, and you're repeating them, and you're finding these opportunities where the kids are having experiences, and you just, okay, this is why we use this value. This is why this feature in the software is valuable. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
In the programming, this is our operating system has all these things, but in this situation, use this. So that's how we think about it. How did you guys think about it, like you and your wife, in terms of religion or in terms of values?
I think so. The reason I say it's automated, because I think if you're very religious and you're Catholic, then you have this community that agrees with your values, right? So you can trust that a private Catholic school is going to teach your child about God, or the golden rule of, all these different things in the religion that you believe, right? So then it's almost like you're not the only one telling them. Now there's this community and this, other group of people telling them something, so it reinforces it, right? And then you also don't have to double check what they're working on or what they're telling your kid. Like, there are a lot of things in public school that are being told to my kids that I am not aware of at all, right? So if I were Catholic and they went to a Catholic school, then I know and I trust that what we're saying at home is what's being told there, right? Whereas by not having that religion, you're almost like it's you against the world. And then you now have the task of making sure that the community your children are exposed to outside of your home is aligned with your values. And a lot of times it's very hard to do and hard to control. So that's why I feel like religion is kind of automated, because you have this group that agrees. But for that to work, you also have to agree with those values and those beliefs, right? So that's not the case for us. I mean, my wife is, also, I think the partner you choose in all this is so important. My wife is amazing. And, we're very much aligned with how we want to raise our children, which I think is really important. The other thing is we support each other. So if my wife is disciplining my kids, even if I don't agree with it, I have to let it ride. And then offline, I'll talk to her about it, right? Because if in front of my children, I kind of dismiss her authority, then the kids are going to be like, well, dad doesn't agree with you, so I don't agree with you. Even if they don't say that, they'll be thinking that, right? So having this united front, I think, is important. But it's also important to talk up front, right? So you don't have these sidebar conversations. You both agree that, hey, we're not doing this with the kids.
Yeah.
So, you know, my wife grew up Catholic as well, but she ended up kind of deviating from the religion as well, because she saw a lot of hypocrisy, where she would see people in her family that were very devout Christians and Catholics, but she knew that they were not behaving like great Christians or Catholics.
Yeah.
But then in the face of the family, they were always good people. But then, you know, behind closed doors, they would do all these things that weren't aligned with the religion. So she saw that as, you know, that kind of took away a lot of the integrity of the religion for her. So she ended up kind of deciding that, oh, this is just a front so that you look like a good person. So that's kind of what she took away from it. And so she deviated from it as well. But I think she agrees there's good values there, but she just doesn't think it's necessary to impose it on the kids. And myself, you know, I grew up with those values, but right around, you know, 13, 14, I started questioning the religion and thinking why, you know, certain things just didn't make sense or add up. I remember going to confession because I felt guilty about it. And the priest told me it's healthy to question your religion. And I was like, really? That was not what I was expecting. I was expecting 10 Our Fathers and 10 Hail Marys as penance, right? But he told me, he said, explore that thought, explore those ideas. It's healthy.
Yeah.
And maybe he made a mistake, because that led me towards leaving the church, right? So, but I still carry a lot of those values with me, whether they're in that frame, like you said, like in that structure,
packaging,
or not. So, but that's the one thing I regret, is like being able to have a community you trust that can also communicate what you're teaching at home, right?
So that's the part. It's either or. It can communicate what you're teaching at home, but it will give a different interpretation of the same thing. Or it will show, or like your wife's situation, where she saw a different behavior that's attached to that. You know, it becomes, the franchise become a facade, but then the back is different. The story is different. So it creates this, this weird kind of dynamic, because humans are not perfect. And then if you go to a church, there are a lot of really good people, but there are also some not so great. And so when you impose this morality on a building, on a group of people, then you think, then it creates this dissonance for the kid. I was like, wow, are you telling me is this, but I'm seeing this. So that's why I try to think of it. Okay, what is the essence of it all? What is, at the end of the day, what's the goal? There's certain values that we want to teach. Let's teach those values. You can teach like, hey, certain religions, they think this, and they think the other religions say that, but it's the same thing. And as long as you use it in everyday life, then you're going to be okay. Which is super valuable. And it is definitely a lot easier to just grab, that package and just like, here you go, just do this. It's a lot easier because of that community component that you mentioned as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree.
So for you, what is the hardest thing about parenting that you found? What's something that caught you off guard?
I think it's it's practicing patience and the balance between, and I think you touched on this earlier, but the balance between providing autonomy to my children, independence, and love, unconditional love, but also discipline, right? So it's like, I want them to be independent and make their own choices, but at the same time, they need to follow my rules, because I know where that can lead if it goes the wrong way, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times I will tell my kids, don't jump on the couch, you're going to fall. But that, I'll say that 4 or 5 times before I yell. Yeah. And then when I yell, it's ugly and I'm upset, they're upset, everyone's upset. And I'm like, why do I have to say it 5 times? Just listen to it the first time.
Yeah.
And they don't get it, right? And then, so then what happens is after, another day, I tell them again, don't jump on the couch, you're going to fall 3, 4 times. Before I get to the 3rd time, they fall, they hit their head, they're crying. And now I've got ice pack on their head and I'm upset with them because I'm like, I told you not to jump. This is what happens. Yeah. But it kind of gives me this clarity that like, I have the life experience where I've fallen in the past and I know why I'm telling them something, but they don't know why.
Right.
And they think I'm, they're like, there's no way I'm going to fall. I know what I'm doing. I'm fine, And I think that's something that is so prominent as a parent.
Yeah.
That I've noticed. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is really just being patient with them. Understanding that if they're upset or they're pushing back on something, I just have to be consistent and patient. And that's hard sometimes. And then also that balance between giving them that autonomy and trusting them, but also giving them the rules and the guidance to say, hey, whether you like it or not, whether you agree or not, because I know better than you, you can't do this. And I hate doing that, but I feel like it's necessary.
Well, I'd say one of the best way to say I know better instead of saying I know better is just to tell them stories. So as a kid, I've done all that and worse. So I tell them my stories where I was, my mom told me not to play with matches, and then I loved the cowboy movies, and so I would go and act like a cowboy, and then how old school they would turn on the dynamites and throw it behind the rocks. So I did that with matches in our house, and I started the fire in our house.
Oh my God!
Half the house was on fire.
Oh my God!
So and my mom didn't know what was going on. So I tell them these stories. And it's like, listen, I've done it. Whatever it is, I broke my arm. I got a cast. I got a cast in my leg. I got stitches in my head. I'll show them the stitches. I'll show them the stitches over here. So I'll tell them the story of every scar.
And they can relate.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, wow, my dad was crazy. Okay, I'm not that crazy. So, they somehow, some way, that actually works way better than me telling them, hey, this is going to happen. Just me telling them what actually happened to me. So it's fun. So what do you
try that? Because after 3 or 4 times, like I lose my patience. I'm like, I can't believe I'm still saying this and you're not listening. Like, what? I need to level up. I need to do the next thing to get their attention. Yeah. And eventually yelling doesn't work, right?
No.
So, and that's why, that Raising Lions book was really good, because especially with my son, we started doing the timeouts, which I didn't believe in the past.
Yeah.
And then when we started doing that, it was a very, unaggressive way to really get the message across. And I felt like it was very calm on my side and patient, and it really worked. They were getting the message, right? So that was really helpful.
Yeah, love it. So what is your goal with your kids? So eventually, what's in your mind, what's your goal?
I think at the end of the day, I want my kids to be happy. I want them to experience love, real genuine love and care from another person. I want them to feel love from their community, and I think I also want them to be confident and fulfilled in their self effort, like the things that they do on their own, right? Yeah. So one thing I always tell my kids, and this is one of the things that I really want to drive home for them, is there's a difference between pleasure and happiness, right? So and you can never have one. You're always going to have to sacrifice one for the other. And the way I see it is, like, pleasure is usually short term, right? But you can enjoy the pleasure, and man, it's great. But you're going to sacrifice the happiness. And if you're okay with that, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to choose. Now, if you want the happiness, that's more long term. And that means you got to give up this short-term pleasure. You got to give this thing up, and that's going to hurt. That's going to suck. But man, it's going to be so fulfilling in the end, right?
Yeah.
There's this really great study that Stanford University did in the 70s, and you can look this up. You can Google it. I give it to my employees all the time. It's part of our core values speech and all that. But they do it with kids. So in the 70s, they had this. They had, like, I don't know, 2,000 children. And they put them in a white room with a white table and a chair. That's it. No toys, no paintings, no clocks, nothing. They had a two-way mirror and a camera. The kid didn't know that they were being filmed. And an adult would come in and place a plate with the one marshmallow right in front of them. And they would say, hey, this marshmallow is yours. You can do whatever you want with this marshmallow. You can eat it. You can throw it across the room. You can do whatever you want with it. But I'm going to step away. And when I come back, if the marshmallow is still here and you haven't eaten it, you get 2. I'll give you 2. Not that one choice is better than the other. You can do whatever you want. It's not wrong. You can eat your marshmallow. You just won't get a second one. And if you choose the other one, it doesn't matter. It's your choice, whatever you want. So they step away. They don't tell them how long they'll be gone. So it's funny to watch the camera. The kids are squirming and they're kind of like, really fighting it. Some of the kids kind of nibble it a little bit and hide it. And some kids don't care. They just pop it in their mouth and they just go on about their day. And other kids, like, they're really struggling. They're struggling not to eat the marshmallow. The adult comes back in. If it's there, they give them 2. If it's not, they give them a high five or whatever. They took note of every child that waited for the second marshmallow and every child that ate it in the first one. And across the board, I think the percentage is above 90%.
Yeah.
It followed these kids for 30 years. And they identified that the ones that waited for the second marshmallow were head and shoulders much more successful than the other kids. More successful in love and marriage, less divorce rates, less, conflicts with family. More successful in academics. So they had higher grades, higher GPAs, higher pedigree schools that they went to. More successful in, salaries and accounting, in finance, and careers, but also more successful in health. They weren't overweight. They had better health decisions. The ones that would eat the marshmallow first had a higher rate of drug abuse and alcohol abuse. So ultimately, what they determined was, after 30 years, that the single most important indicator of success in any aspect of your life, whether it's love or finance or anything, is the ability to delay gratification. These children were 4 years old. My son's 4 now. We're going to test it on him.
Yeah.
With my daughter when she was 4, and she did great. Yeah. But, at 4 years old, they, whatever their tendency is really will indicate how they're going to grow up and what they're going to do. So I think it's really important for my kids to understand that difference between pleasure and happiness. So I see pleasure as like, hey, I got to study for this exam. It's going to take me 2 or 3 days to get to where I need to get to do well on Friday.
Yeah.
Or I can go to this pool party where this really cute girl that I've been trying to talk to for a long time is going to be there, and she's asking about me. Do I go to the pool party or do I study? Right. So you can do the pleasure, but you're going to sacrifice the exam.
Yeah.
And that might be okay. Maybe this is your soulmate, right? Or you can sacrifice the pool party and do well on the exam. And in the long run, you're going to have happiness and fulfillment because you did well on that exam and you opened a lot of doors for yourself later, right? So that idea of like, if you can delay this gratification for the greater good, a lot of times in my life, when I have to make a choice, I'll say, is this 1 marshmallow or is this 2? Yeah. And it'll help me kind of evaluate the choice. And it sucks, but later on, you really get to enjoy true happiness, right? If you're willing to give up some upfront pleasure, right? So that's a big one for us.
That's huge. It's so important because, like you mentioned, it affects everything: health, wealth, relationships, reputation, everything. And I think what I like to marry that concept, that delayed gratification, with the concept of compounding, the magic of compounding, and essentially give them a visual of, just like the graph of like Warren Buffett's wealth, or the graph of someone else's progression in terms of like success in sports, or like, show them like how a musician has been like in obscurity for so many years, and all of a sudden it just took like one event and all of a sudden they became like top of the world. Or Kobe Bryant has been working out on his own for like so many years, no one knew who he was, and then he came to the US, and then boom, all of a sudden he's it's just these, almost like show them a visual of that same graph, that it's slow for a long time, and then boom, and then you're like, and I think having a sense of what success looks like, because sometimes when we tell the kids, oh, it's going to be better later, they don't know what that looks like. They can't touch it. They can't feel. They can touch the thing right now. It's almost like you show them the 2 marshmallows, or you make them smell them or touch them. You know what I mean? And so it's a lot, it has much stronger impact than saying, hey, it's going to be better later. I'm like, well, I have this bird now. I don't want to like, try to go for those two. You know what I mean? Bird in the hand.
I'm an adult. I'm a 44-year-old
Yes.
man. I had a household. I struggle with that now. Like my
Yes.
wife's got me on this diet. We've been on this diet for a couple of weeks, and
Yeah.
man, I just want a cheeseburger.
Yes.
There's so many times in the day where I'm like, I don't want this. 8 hard-boiled eggs.
Yes.
I want to go get an In-N-Out burger, and I'll text my wife and she'll laugh and we're joking, but it's exactly that. It's like,
Yes.
dude, I would kill for a burger right now, but
Yes.
I want to lose the 10 pounds. I want to lose the weight,
Yes.
It's a constant. I think it's a human thing, and you're always going to have that, but you got to have that tool in your toolbox. You got to know that's happening and it's occurring at every stage that you're making a decision.
And your strength, your will, strength of your will be stronger if you take a picture of yourself 10-pound lighter or 20-pound lighter, and you put this like, oh, I want to go back to that person.
Yeah.
And then if you visually see that person, you're a lot more likely to say, okay, I can do away with the In-N-Out burger or the double. Let me just let me stick on the path. And I think the same thing with kids. You just need that visual. And so the more stories you give them of these people that sacrificed the short term for the long term, the better it is. And especially when there are people that have the same interest as them. So if they're interested in this, like bring a story of someone in that space that did that, or if they're interested, whether it is music or like, my daughter likes Taylor Swift. I'm not a fan of Taylor Swift, but my daughter likes her music. It's like, great, let's look at her story and see where she sacrificed the short term for the long term, and how much grind and how much work and how much work ethic she has to put in. Or my son likes jiu-jitsu, so we'll look at the Gracie brothers and their story and their whatever, and we'll talk about Kobe Bryant, we'll talk about Warren Buffett, and we'll talk about Elon Musk, and we'll talk about all these people that are known and people that are not as known. It's such a powerful thing, and I think if they can download that software, that's like they're going to be fine the rest of their life.
And I think what's important also is the programming, like you said, right? We got to get it while you can, because like I heard this story where I forgot who told me, but they'd seen a study that between the age of 10 and 13, you don't know when it's going to hit.
Yes.
But right around that age, your children stop listening to you, and you can no longer tell them new things.
Yeah.
You can only reference back to what you've told them over time, because at that point, the nature of our species and a lot of other species is at that age, they have to leave the tribe. It's a survival instinct against incest, right? So they have to leave the tribe to go find their own tribe and their own mate and everything else, right?
Yeah.
So instinctively, this switch goes on where I'm not going to listen to my parents anymore. I'm going to now start listening to my friends' parents, or my teachers, or other people out there. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with the teenage years, right? Because they're getting a lot of conflict, and it's like you're telling them one thing, but they're not listening anymore. They've shut that door.
Yeah.
So one thing that he noticed was he's like, my son is 10. I only have 3 more years with him. So what he did is he filled up a jar with 36 marbles. And every month on the first of the month, he has a reminder on his phone to take out a marble and throw it away, because that action reminds him he has 1 less month to provide him the tools that he'll need in the future. Because when this jar is empty, he's going to stop listening to me, right? So I thought that was really powerful, and that's why I'm kind of putting these Alex Velazquez meditations together, right? My thoughts and the mantras I want my kids to learn, and also the programming, like you said, it's important to just kind of repeat and share these values. They're not innate, right? Just because I think I know certain things that I've learned around my life, my kids aren't just going to pick that up. I have to speak it.
Teach them, tell them stories. But that's a great point that you mentioned around the teenage years, and there's a point where they separate, and they're point where they go from learning from you to learning from their peers. And so they're now they want to learn from the outside, from other people. And that's, for me, the way I've been defending, or not defending, but kind of programming for that, is I've been teaching them how to build a high quality network. So like as soon as they were like 4 or 5, we've been talking about what does an ideal friend profile look like. So my goal is twofold. One is that obviously it's good for them to have friends, to be able to intentionally be able to acquire high quality friends, but also down the line when they're 12, 13, they've learned to curate a high quality network. So when they're learning from these people that I already know they're good quality, then I don't have to worry about where they're getting their learning from. So it's kind of like you're preempting what's about to happen, and you're setting up a foundation. So they're not learning. So like, if their friends are like, competitive gymnasts or a competitive robot programmer, or someone who's building, likes to build, businesses and wants to do this, or someone who's got like a million follower channel and has developed the skills or how to develop. I want them around those kids. So now I've already built in as much as I could. And then if they get in, what they're going to see from the other kids is the same stuff that I taught them.
Yeah.
For that gymnast to earn the medal, they had to work very hard, and they had to sacrifice the short term for the long term. For that, one of their friends is like a really good swimmer, is like a medal winning swimmer. So they see the work ethic. They see like 5 days of workouts, and then at home, and then, they go to their home, they see the training, they see the nutrition, they see, so they're surrounded with an ecosystem of high performance kids.
Yeah. And they're able to identify them on their own, which is critical. By the way, I just wrote that down. I think that's awesome. That's huge, man. I got what
my son
profile look like.
One of my son's favorite people, kids, want to go to MIT. She talks about MIT all the time. And my son is telling me I want to go to MIT. Great.
Yeah. So important, man. It's so important. And I hadn't thought about that, but that's so key, because you're right. They need to be able to choose the right community, right? And the right group of friends, and know why, right? Yes. What are the things that they really care about? Yes. Yeah, that's huge, man. I'm gonna take that. I'll give you credit. I'll put Jay for Jay here.
Put that in the mantra.
This is the Jay's meditation.
Yeah, I think it's one of the advantages of like us moving a lot is that, by default, you literally have to rebuild networks every time. So our kids kind of felt that need to rebuild. And so I spent time with them, teaching them how to rebuild those networks. So while we're doing it, if we're going to build a network, well, let's pick what kind of network we want. Let's just design it, with from first principle, and figure out what kind of people do we want to hang out with. So I think I find that it's a super powerful skill to program the kids, to give the kids to be able to
their whole lives. They'll benefit from that. One thing I do want to note and clarify is we talk about at age 13, the kids leave the tribe to go start their own path. They stop listening to you.
Yeah.
The other side of that is at the age 22, that ends, and the switch turns off, and they come back. And usually at that point, you have a lifelong relationship with you. And if you think about your relationship with your parents, it's very true, right? Around that time, you kind of go off and make your own mistakes.
Yes.
And then right after college, you're like, together again, and you're talking, and you're always spending time together. You choose to have weekends together and things like that. So I think if you're a successful parent, that means that your kids come back after that phase, and then you got a lifelong, friend and relationship. That's the other thing is, like, you don't want to be your kid's friend when they're too young. You got to be the discipline. You got to be the bearer of bad news. And if you do that right, when they're adults, you'll have a friend forever.
Yeah.
But if you want to be their friend and you let them do what they want, they walk all over you, and you don't give them that discipline or anything else, it could end up being, they may never come back, right? They may just stray off. And so I think it's important to kind of think about that, is you're a parent first. The relationship you have with your parent, with your kids, you have to, it's a friendly relationship. You have a good, strong relationship, but above that, you have to be the disciplinary. You have to be the one that's guiding them, and you have to tell them stuff they don't want to hear, and they're going to fight back. And if you don't want to hear that, too bad. That's part of your job. You got to give them the ugly stuff that they don't want to hear, and they're gonna push back. And
it's like a good coach, just like a coaching. It's just like a coach. A coach is going to teach you is going to give you a vision for the future, but also is going to hold you accountable to to your goals. And as long as you're aligned with the team, winning, then we're good. And and it's super valuable. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate Alex taking the time, to share with us your wisdom. It was great. And we got to do this again.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Man, I appreciate it. Look, I learned a lot. I got a new mantra here. So I appreciate it, man. It was great talking with you. And I love this topic. I mean, I always wanted to be a parent. And so, being very intentional about this stuff, I think is important because it doesn't just happen. So, I think as an entrepreneur, you're always building your team to be the most successful team, right? But then one thing I heard recently was, I think Mike McCarthy mentioned it, but he's like, your family is your most important team.
Yeah.
Like how much effort is going into building that team?
Yes.
And, all the time you spend with your employees to make the core values and to line everything and to make sure you're communicating and 360, feedback. Like you're not doing any of that at home.
Yes.
And that's your most important team.
Yes.
That's your most important group. So
yeah,
I love this.
No one. It's kind of like one of those things. Like you begin with the end in mind, and the end is like you're in your deathbed, thinking, I had a good life, but the only thing I regret is X. And if you had a really good, loving, connected relationship with your kids, you're not gonna regret anything.
Yeah.
Nothing else matters. The only thing that it would be a regret is if you didn't have that connection, if you didn't have that relationship, even if you miss on business opportunities or you didn't fulfill all your potential, whatever, you still wouldn't regret it because you had a loving connection with your kids and your grandkids, and you have a deep relationship with your family.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in elders, and I think our society tends to kind of shut elders out. But man, if you go to somebody who's in their 80s and still cognitively there, ask them what really matters in life, and they'll tell you, it's not working late on a Saturday. It's family. Like another study where I think they asked about 800 people that were above the age of 80 what the best years of their life were. Yeah. And 90% of them said it was when my children were young, and so when we get to that age, we're going to look back and say, these were the times. So I ran downstairs and I told my wife, I'm like, babe, they just, there's a study and it's like, these are the best years of our lives. Yeah. My wife's holding a baby who's pulling at her hair. There's like a small grease fire on the stove. My daughter's pulling at her leg. The dog's barking. She turns around. She's like, these are the best years. These are the best years of our lives.